I got it. You're good.
Okay, you got it? Okay, perfect. All right, everybody. So my name is Luis Morales, health fitness specialist with Exos at Autodesk. I'm super excited to be here today to kick off the Design to Run training program webinar number 1, specifically about myths and misconceptions. So let's go ahead and get right into it. What I'm gonna ask you guys to do is save any questions you guys have for the end. We're gonna go ahead and get into a little discussion at the end there. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Why could I not? There we go. All right, so basically what we're going to go through today here, guys, is training misconceptions, recovery myths, nutrition misconceptions, and then we'll end with some questions. So slide number 1 here, training misconceptions. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So, whoops, went too far. There we go. All right, so strength training and stretching. So dynamic stretch before run, static stretch after run. And so this was a kind of a previous misconception that static stretching prior to training in general was the best way in order to kind of loosen up. However, recent research tells us that this approach not only kind of decreases our performance capabilities, but it also doesn't help us do any good in preventing injury. So we want to dynamically stretch before runs because we want to retain some elasticity in the muscular tissue and also in the tendon tissue. So moving through ranges of motion dynamically is the most efficient and effective warm-up. And then so cooling down with longer static stretching will help us create kind of lasting ranges of motion and prevent our tissues from retracting too far while recovering. So proper strength training is not going to make us bulky or quote unquote tight. So what does this mean? Muscle function should not be drastically changing due to your strength training. If you're starting to feel really restricted, it's a good opportunity to kind of reevaluate, how quick am I doing these movements? What ranges am I doing these movements in? Kind of take another look at your strength training because it really shouldn't be making you, super tight or super kind of feeling bulky. And then, so both of these things, strength training in general and stretching are really great for injury prevention. I mean, kind of a lot of people think that it's the other way around, but stronger tissues are more resilient tissues. All right, so moving on here. More isn't always better. Better is better. So this is a really key one here, guys. I think a lot of people think that as long as I'm pushing the maximum quantity, then that is the best I can do. But training too often can actually affect adaptations of exercise. So the body needs time to make positive adaptations. Without adequate recovery, we're actually unable to improve. And so too much stress on the body will also have a negative impact on progress. And so I want to take a moment. I actually drew up a little bit of a graph here you guys can see on my whiteboard. So what I wanted to, adaptations, basically, this first line as we think of the horizontal line here as our baseline. This first line as we come down, we're stressing the body out with our workouts. And then what we want to do is adapt and improve and end up above the baseline. But oftentimes what happens when we train too much, train too often, is we end up stressing ourselves out way too much and we either break even, coming up kind of back to our baseline, or we don't even break even at all. We kind of have a negative adaptation, this bottom line here, not even reaching back up to baseline. So this is kind of what we want to be doing, guys, with our adaptations, is stressing our body out, adequately, but not so much that we can't come up past the baseline and make positive adaptations. So I wanted to show you guys that real quick, simple little graph there.
Sorry, I couldn't see the graph. Just wanted to let you know.
Couldn't see the graph.
No, sorry.
It's in the camera. It's not in the slideshow.
Oh, that's right. Whatever. I'll put a picture on in the second webinar here, or I'll put it on the page. So basically, guys, all we wanted to do was stress our bodies out some, but not so much that we basically cannot positively adapt. So an optimal, but not maximal amount of training in all types can breed diverse adaptation. And so the advice here is don't get tunnel vision on just training one quality at a time. We want to be able to expand our horizons and train a little bit out of our comfort zones to gain all sorts of capabilities. So moving on to recovery myths. Muscle recovery. So this is where I think a lot of people have some misconceptions, specifically about foam rolling. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. What is the goal of foam rolling? I think a lot of people, I've heard a lot of different things over the years. And a lot of people think, basically to loosen up the tissue, right? To lengthen the tissue. So the goal of foam rolling is actually to change the sensation of the certain area that you're rolling. So foam rolling does not lengthen the tissues of the body simply by compressing them and rolling over it repeatedly. It changes the signals that the brain receives about how that area feels. So relevant example, if I have restricted quads that are feeling pretty tight the day after a run and I choose to foam roll them, what I'm doing is changing the way my brain perceives that area. And the movement and the stretching after the rolling will be what actually lengthens the tissue. So if you roll on a certain area and you don't follow with some movement in that area that you rolled, it's going to feel a little bit different, but there's not going to be lasting change applied to the tissue, which is what our actual kind of end goal is. All right, so trigger point therapy, stuff that we usually do with lacrosse balls or tennis balls. I'm sure we've all been there and felt knots in muscles and in areas that get really tight and tender with no signs of resolving. So trigger point therapy is the applied pressure to these areas, typically done with a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball, to kind of get into a really precise area, whether that be in smaller muscles or in larger muscle groups, but in one kind of little area. So latent trigger points, same thing, except that these trigger points don't immediately present with pain. We've all been there where it kind of feels really tight and you can feel pain all the time. But latent trigger points are the same thing, and you're not going to feel pain unless you directly compress them. So these things are really sneaky, and these can really decrease our joint range of motion over time as we age. So it's important to address your tissues all the time, even if they're not feeling immediately tight or painful. All right, heating and icing, another good area to kind of debunk some stuff. So heat increases muscle temperature, blood flow. So simply put, heat will make muscles feel good, bringing oxygenated red blood cells into the area, which does help with healing. So when should you use heat? Before running, if necessary. This is kind of a possibility if you're really trying to make an area melt, so to say, before a run. But also the beginning of the day or ends of the day are really good to get some heat therapy in if you're trying to kind of have a little regen session or recovery session. All right, ice. This is kind of the bigger one. Ice reduces muscle temperature and inflammation. And ice is really good at reducing swelling inflammation. But what this is actually doing is disrupting the body's natural healing and adaptation processes. So even though it's great at taking the inflammation away, the inflammation is actually what you want, because without inflammation, there is no adaptation. And without the inflammation, the body is kind of robbed of doing its own natural healing process. So when should you be icing? Very rarely. I try to suggest that people avoid ice at all costs when it comes to swollen knees or sore muscles or anything like that after or before running. So I guess your best practices are going to be heat and movement. If you guys have really tight areas, stuff like that, if you're not going to get into it with a lacrosse ball or a foam roller, heat is gonna make it feel good basically, but then movement overall is going to be the best medicine. So movement equals medicine in a lot of different situations. Tight muscles all the way up to a lot of injuries. All right, so moving on, nutrition misconceptions. So we'll go ahead and start with protein intake. We'll go ahead and kind of tackle just a couple big macronutrients here. The general recommendation for protein intake is 1 gram per 1 pound of body weight per day. So most of us actually kind of lack in this protein level, or keeping up with these protein levels. And if your goal is weight loss, protein is the #1 macronutrient to focus on for that goal. And what this does, it helps keep muscle tone. It obviously maintains strength, which we all need for running. And most processes in our body, metabolic, catabolic, anabolic, all use protein. So some good sources for protein, obviously, is going to be meats, eggs, dairy, and if you're more vegetarian or vegan, tofu, and lentils. Also fish. All right, so moving on to carbohydrate intake. So this is should be a main focus for you if you are an endurance athlete. Basically, carbohydrates equal fuel. So a low carb diet is not optimal for endurance athletes. That's basically trying to go really far with not a lot of gas in your tank if you're on a low carb diet. Timing of meals around training sessions. So a meal or something high calorie, high carb should be consumed 30 minutes to an hour prior to your endurance session, and refueling should take place within an hour after the session is done. It's really important, replenishing what the body has used in a timely manner will prevent us from feeling depleted throughout the rest of our day. And carbs are not your enemy, they are your friend. So even if your ultimate goal is weight loss, carbs still your friend. Don't skip out on carbs with just aesthetic goals in mind. We really do need them for basic human function and performance. All right, you guys, so I zipped through that. Let's go ahead and get into some questions here. And before we start with the questions, let me just say that I welcome all questions, but I may not have all the answers to your questions today. So I'm looking forward to getting into kind of a discussion and seeing what you guys have for me. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Can you describe some benefits of what foam rolling does? I know it makes your muscles, I guess, sense that feeling a little differently, but what are the benefits of it?
Well, basically kind of what you just touched on, different sensations. I think that I think over the years, foam rolling has been just way too hyped up, and it doesn't actually do a whole lot. You can really, foam rolling, you can in certain ways, however, depending on however you're using it, you can use it to mobilize tissue or even bones and joints. But basically, the #1 thing that foam rolling can do is change the sensation in your body, basically interact with the nervous system and say, hey, let's make this area feel a little bit different. Therefore, I'm going to be able to move a little bit better. I'm going to be able to feel a little bit better after the foam rolling. So that's kind of basically it.
Thanks.
I've heard before some other people have asked me if foam rolling, releases things like lactic acid, which is actually not a thing, or lactate in the muscles or anything like that by doing it. And the answer to that is it does not. So no other kind of special physiological things that come from repeatedly compressing and rolling over tissue.
Okay.
Luis, we have a couple questions in the chat. So the first one here from Aaron is, with regards to recovery, can a percussive device like a Theragun help?
Yeah, definitely. Percussive devices, Theraguns, hyperices, all those things are really good and have pretty similar effects in that they are not only interacting with the nervous system and changing changing the way the brain feels about that area of the body, but they're also really good at redistributing fluid and things like that. So say you kind of have a swollen area, a swollen hip, a swollen knee, using a device like that around the tissues around that area will kind of also prompt the body and the lymphatic system move fluid, and can create more ranges of motion without it being as how do we say this? I guess less uncomfortable versus foam rolling and stuff like that. So yeah, really great way to interact with the nervous system and lymphatic system.
And another question here in the chat from Lanny, that is that recommendation of 1 gram of protein per 1 pound of body weight a general recommendation or more relevant to a certain level of training?
I would definitely say it's more of a general recommendation, and feel free to chime in on this yourself, Jazzy, because protein recommendations, as far as all, there are a lot of different associations out there, National Athletic Training Association, Strength and Conditioning Associations, that all have varying levels of protein recommendations per day. If you are male or female, if your training goal is, putting on weight versus if you're an endurance athlete, some of these things will vary. They're not going to vary very much. I've seen, it'll be like a 1.4 grams versus 1.8 or 2.5 grams versus 2 grams. So the recommendations aren't going to vary very much. However, the general recommendation, I think, is a great place to start if you are just now starting to count your macronutrients and finding kind of a baseline for yourself.
I have a question about elevation. I have
Sure.
been traveling back and forth from San Francisco to Tahoe and back, and my
Mhm.
training has been lacking because, I mean, it's going, but it's been very difficult to run in altitude. So is there any recommendations on how I should change it up based on where I am? I don't know if that's pretty open-ended, but I'm just thinking like in maybe nutrition or recovery. I don't know.
Sure. That's a great question. This has definitely been something that I think has been studied over a long period of time. Just a quick background for you, Allison. So I went to school in Reno, which sits at about 5,500 feet of elevation, and there was a significant amount of discussion in my classes over the years when I was in school about how much the elevation really does affect, and it does have an effect. But nothing super crazy. And I think my suggestion to you as a coach would be welcome that different environment for training, because that will make you kind of that much more diverse, even though it is kind of it will be more difficult when you're there. I would try and dive into it head first, because that will kind of bring on some more adaptations, make you a more diverse athlete. And as far as nutrition recovery goes, I'm not aware of any methods that will help kind of give you an extra edge when it comes to training in altitude versus training a little closer to sea level here in the Bay Area.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions in the chat, Jazzy?
Is there a difference between like complex carbs and simple carbs in our understanding of like how we should train and stuff, or how we should fuel? Sorry.
No, that's a really good question. And as far as nutrition goes, that's probably the area in which I don't know as much about. So great question, Moon. I would also kind of be curious on what the answer is to that, as far as if you're really going to get into the weeds of parsing out simple carbohydrates versus complex carbohydrates. So yeah, I don't have a real direct answer for you. All I can tell you about carbohydrates in general is that we need a lot of them, and our body, basically, I think however many carbohydrates, simple or complex, we're getting, it's breaking them down into the same thing through glycolysis. So I think it might come down to maybe a more of an amount versus the type, because it is going to be broken down into simple sugar through glycolysis and turned into energy that we can use eventually. So good question though. Definitely we'll get back to you on that one. Do some research.
Thanks.
I can kind of hop in here to help answer that question as
Sure,
well.
yeah.
When you are training or you're going into a workout, the types of carbs are not necessarily going to be as important to make sure you are getting complex carbs. So backtracking a little bit with complex carbs, right? It's going to take our bodies a little bit longer to break that down and digest it, especially if there is more fiber content there. So things like sweet potatoes are going to have a little bit more fiber. Oatmeal going to have a little bit more fiber in it. That's going to take a little bit longer to digest. It's going to pull water into your gut. It might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable going into a training session, going into a long run. You don't want to eat a lot of fiber before going to work out, whether that's a lift or a run, just because that's going to be your body's going to be trying to digest that as you're also stressing your body out. So your digestive system won't be able to kind of process it that well or that fast. So that's where around any training, doing more of like a simple carbohydrate or something with less fiber. So things like white rice, cream of rice, those are going to be good sources to have around a workout. So then that way, before the workout, your body can digest, send it off to where it needs to be to fuel you for your activity. And then after the fact, to be able to refuel yourself again, digesting it quickly, and your body can send that off and process it to where it needs to be from what you did during your training session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool. I'm seeing in the chat, Williams, with the question. The question is, any recommendation for protein supplements, including brands, protein types, etc.? This is a good question. I would definitely, everyone kind of has different needs. And so based on if you have any dietary restrictions, if you're more vegan or plant-based, you're going to want a plant-based protein because other proteins are not plant-based. Basically they're animal-based whey proteins, but I definitely, it's tough. I definitely don't have any specific brand recommendations or recommendation types, just because the market is so saturated. There are so many. Maybe Jazzy has something more specific here with this, but might just take you some time to go out and find what works best for you and what feels best for you. So yeah.
Thanks for that answer, but which one do you guys use, for instance?
Sure. Let's see. I think mine is from Optimum Nutrition. You can find it on Amazon, and it's a basic whey protein, which is a dairy base, I believe. And so that's what I'm on currently. What about you, Jasmine?
So I buy my protein from a supplement company called Raw Nutrition, and I use that because they have a very high certification process. So it's like NSF certified, as well as I can't remember what the other one's called, but it's like a lot of testing done to it. But I do use a vegan protein because whey upsets my stomach and I'm allergic to dairy. So I usually like to use vegan proteins. And another vegan protein I do like to use is actually the Sprouts brand vegan protein. I find that it tastes way better than most vegan proteins. So
Cool. Thank you.
yeah, no problem.
Tons of variety out there. Yeah, so I recommend kind of shopping around. Also, I think the experts at your local supplement store, GNC, things like that, will also have a lot of good information for you there.
Another
Cool. Good questions, guys.
probably should point you all towards is going to be On It Nutrition. They're an Exos partner. They have, again, quality testing there. And the other one would be Thorn Nutrition. So those two are going to be good options to also start and get some, you can do a lot of reading on their articles and do some research on those websites as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thorn and On It are really, really good. Tons of supplements, not just protein. So yeah, lots of good questions here, guys. Anything else before we start to close it up?
Just one question about the upcoming sessions. Are you covering sleep, water intake, stuff like that in the upcoming seminars, webinars, whatever you call it?
So the next upcoming webinar, I'll switch the slide here, is going to be on Tuesday, April 6th, and that's going to be a deeper dive into nutrition. So we will be, talking hydration there as well. As far as recovery, I believe we're also going to be touching on some recovery as we go. The third webinar is going to be a little more centered around tips and tricks around race day and setting up your actual virtual race as we get a little closer to it in the beginning of May. So
Great.
yeah, we'll be touching on that for sure.
Looking forward to that one. Thank you. This is great.
Awesome. All right, you guys. So if there are no other questions, still open to questions if anyone has any. But as you can see here on the screen, Designed to Run training program. Yeah, the second webinar is Tuesday, April 6th. And that is nutrition for runners. And it looks like we can, yeah, it's 1:27. Go ahead and get out of here right on time. Thank you guys all for coming. Listen to me talk here for a little bit. And I loved all the questions. Everyone came up with some great questions. So super excited for that. I hope everyone has some good takeaways and learnings from this. We're looking forward to seeing you guys at the next webinar on April 6th. So thank you for joining Jazzy and I. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
See you guys. Everyone take care.